And one of the other things that I had on my mind was the student relief program that President Joe Biden had tried to push through. That was struck down by the Supreme Court, 6-3 decision against President Biden's plan to relieve student loan debt. That was going to cost the country over $1 trillion they had projected. And 6-3 voting, I have no doubt that that ruling fell along conservative lines. The 6 conservative court justices decided to vote against it. 6 liberal justices decided to vote in favor of it. The Sonia Sotomayor's of the world, the Elena Kagans of the world, people like that. Obviously, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Those are the 3 liberal justices. The other 6, Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, and just the list goes on and on. Chief Justice Roberts and Samuel Alito and Brett Kavanaugh, of course, Clarence Thomas. Let's not forget him. We know he's going to make his voice known against it. I found it incredibly insulting for him. Say what you will about affirmative action, and please understand the court's ruling on affirmative action, which is a different situation than the student loan relief. When they talked about affirmative action, which the ruling came before, I found it insulting coming from Clarence Thomas simply because this is a man that went to Yale off of his affirmative action program, benefited from affirmative action, and then engaged in revisionist history talking about how appalled he was by it and how he felt it did him harm. Well, a lot of harm it did. I mean, you're a Supreme Court justice. I mean, that's his definition of harm. He goes to Yale, benefits off of affirmative action, climbs that ladder, and then knocks down the ladder to prevent anybody else from climbing the same ladder he climbed. I mean, it's a walking piece of hypocrisy. Plain and simple. But that's neither here nor there, because I wasn't surprised by it at all, because I knew they alluded to modifying affirmative action and its role with college admissions. Remember, they said race would be considered one of many components warranting consideration for admission into an institution of higher learning. It didn't say it was the be-all, end-all, but they still made sure to eradicate that. And in my opinion, they made sure to eradicate that because that's step one. You do it then it's easier to put forth the same ruling when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which practically everyone seems to be adopting in corporate America these days. So when you have corporations that are looking to make sure 10% of its staff is African American, or, whatever corporation chooses to do so, that's no longer legal. And the irony in all of it is, ladies and gentlemen, do you know white folks in America will get to be able to sue based on discrimination? I want you to think about that for a second. Considering the historical iniquities of this country, the perpetrators of racial bias, the inventors of racial discrimination, and by the way, white people out there, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking history. I don't look at white people and say, you did this, but your ancestors did. The very perpetrators, or the ancestors of the perpetrators of racial discrimination, will soon be in a position to file racial discrimination lawsuits. Not that they could have before, but this case will be strengthened now. I just find that to be a bit ironic. And I can say that, ladies and gentlemen, number one, because I don't look at every white person and say, oh my God, they're racist just because they're white. I judge you on the content of your character. I know white people that are very, very good, and I know black folks that ain't shit. Good people, decent people, God-fearing people, and sorry-ass people come in all colored shapes and sizes. That's how I roll. But from a numbers perspective, clearly, black folks have been at a disadvantage. And now the clock has been rewinded a touch to that. Affirmative action. That was number one. Now you got the student loan relief. Now guess where it gets interesting when it comes to me. I'm one of those people that never had a problem with those who oppose student loan relief. I paid my student loan. When folks talked about student loan relief, I wasn't necessarily vibing with all that. Now again, there's a caveat. The desolate and the disenfranchised, I'm always for it. Help those who are less fortunate than ourselves and our society the best way you possibly can. You with me on that, Gaff, right? No problem. I got that. And the elderly and disabled, definitely. Every man and woman otherwise for themselves. I had to pay my debt, why aren't you paying yours? That was my belief. That was my belief. Okay? But the reason why I wasn't dogged about it, particularly with my public pronunciations, or pronouncements rather, is because that's when all things are fair and equal. See, if the economy is thriving and inflation isn't ravaging our country and a recession doesn't seem to be in play, then hell with that student loan relief. Get out there and do it. We have to pay our loans off. You pay your loans off. Period. You had 3 years of a reprieve because of COVID. Now, I ain't down with the interest rates being applied. That's slick. You could simply enforce people have to start making their student loan payments again without charging that damn interest. You ain't got to be that slick, which the government always is. But my attitude was, yo, I had to pay my loan. I know hundreds of people had to pay their loans. Why are you getting off? But then I looked at President Biden giving his speech the other day. And you bragging about the economy. Well, if you're bragging about the economy and how 13 million new jobs have been created, and the workforce is back and thriving, then what's the problem with people paying their loans? I'll tell you what the problem is. They ain't getting paid enough. Because the dollar has diminished. Inflation, recession, etc. And just because you're employed don't mean you're gainfully employed. And if you're not gainfully employed, you can't afford to pay off loans. And if the country is ravaged primarily due to decisions made by politicians and made by folks on Wall Street, and if those things have ravaged our economy, then that's not the fault of the average citizen walking out here trying to earn their livings, working hard every day just to pay their bills. And under those circumstances, I do support student loan relief. Because the government hasn't lived up to its obligation. And the financial sector in corporate America hasn't lived up to its financial obligation. If you're underpaying folks, they showing up to work to do their job. If you can't afford to pay them a serviceable living, then there should be some relief granted. See how it works? Either way you slice it. To reiterate and regurgitate the obvious, I'll say it again. When white folks catch a cold, black folks catch pneumonia. So no matter how bad it is for society, it's usually worse for black people. Which means that when we're talking about student loan relief, although black folks aren't the only ones, we all know they're the ones that's going to suffer the most. And that was for those fortunate enough to get a college education. Because we all know there's a whole bunch of black folks that haven't been fortunate enough to be able to afford a college education. Because of things that have happened systemically, and the kind of things that have kept us down, and the kind of ladder that we've had to scratch and claw, the terrain that we've had to scratch and claw our way through just to get above water. to get a decent job, let alone get a college education that'll ultimately position you for an even greater job and a greater opportunity. Some don't make it that far. And where's that going to leave them?